All right, joining us now, member of the Homeland Security Committee, Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Senator, thank you very much for being on the show this morning. What are your thoughts on the president holding a rally in your state? Do you think that's safe?
President's always welcome to be able to come to Oklahoma. Same thing with any president is always welcome to be able to come to Oklahoma. I'm fully aware that a lot of the nation's looking at Oklahoma right now and saying, I can't believe that they're holding a political rally. Our restaurants have been open. Our retail has been open for 7 weeks now. We're way ahead of a lot of the other areas of the country. We've seen an increase in numbers over the last 5 days or so. We think that was expected. I don't say we think it was expected. It was expected as we reopen retail, as we reopen restaurants. Protests obviously have been around my state as well. And so that re-engagement, we've seen an uptick, but we've not seen an uptick in hospitalizations, in deaths. So it's younger folks that are getting it. And we're advising people if they're coming to the rally, if you have comorbidities, if you are older or you have other health issues, don't come. Watch it on TV and be very attentive. Our health department has made available testing. We have 80 different test sites across the state, and they've told folks, they advise them to go get a test before they come, and they're going to pass out masks and hand sanitizer and do temperature checks as folks enter the rally as well. So trying to make it as safe as possible.
Yeah, Senator, would you recommend to your supporters that go there and the president's supporters that go there that they do wear the masks once they're inside?
I do, actually. And again, that's going to be an individual decision. The hard part about it, and I've tried to explain this to other folks, when you're in a large gathering like that, as you know, it's hard to be able to hear sometimes someone next to you. So there's going to be times they're going to pull a mask on and off. So that's why I really encourage people, if you have other health issues, I discourage you from coming to the event. But a lot of folks, I believe, are coming, and the state's very excited about receiving the president.
So I don't want to dwell on this too long, but I'm wondering, I remember Mobile, Alabama in 2015, the president had, I think, an event at Ladd Stadium there. It was an outdoor event. We've certainly heard from healthcare officials that an outdoor event, an outdoor venue would be better. Are there outdoor venues that could hold as many people in the area as the indoor arena?
There is the stadium at the University of Tulsa that's there. Obviously, in Norman and Stillwater, there are two very large stadiums as well that are gathering spots. But as you know fully well from growing up in the South as well, the heat that you deal with at this time of year is pretty oppressive at times and very unpredictable.
So tell me about Tim Scott's legislation regarding police reforms. Do you support that piece of legislation? Do you support that approach, or is there another approach you think would be more effective?
No, I absolutely support that approach. There's 6 of us that have actually been working together with Tim Scott to be able to pull this legislation together. I'm one of those folks, and I absolutely support this legislation. This deals with transparency. It deals with mental health issues. It deals with trying to be able to get information to the public about what's going on, increased use of body cameras, making sure those body cameras actually stay on. If police file false reports, having some accountability on filing a false report. There's a lot of areas that we go into to be able to make sure that we're providing as much accountability as we possibly can. Police reform shouldn't be a partisan issue. This should be a common sense issue, and this should be cooperation between individuals in the black community, individuals across the country, private citizens, and law enforcement to try to fix the issue. I don't find law enforcement that want to have bad apples in the mix. They want to have the accountability and the transparency so that the great officers, and there are many around the country, that can continue to be able to serve and protect, and those folks that are actually giving law enforcement a bad name are no longer there.
Senator Lankford, it's Willie Geist. Appreciate you coming on this morning. You were reported to have been a couple of weeks ago one of the senators who, in a meeting of your Republican caucus mates, said, look, guys, African Americans in this country clearly have a different experience with law enforcement than a lot of us do. We have to acknowledge that and do something about that. Do you feel like the rest of the Republicans in that room understand that distinction? Obviously, Tim Scott is the lone African-American member of your caucus. He's leading the legislation on this from your side. Do you believe Republicans understand, number one, and believe, number two, that African-Americans have a different experience with law enforcement than do white Americans?
So let me say a couple of things on this, Willie. One is, yes, I do believe that African Americans have a different experience with law enforcement than a lot of other Americans do. You can talk about that being a systemic issue. You can talk about all kinds of different issues with that. You can talk about communities where there's crime or whatever it may be. that is a different experience for them. I have many African-American friends that I have in Oklahoma that have been pulled over for driving while black, and they have a very different experience than I have, that I've not had that type of experience to just have a random pullover on that. So that is something we do need to address, and I think it's something our conference understands extremely well. Let me make one side comment on this as well, Willie. You talked about Tim Scott being the lone African-American member in the Republican conference. That's been an interesting conversation over the last couple of weeks as Tim's been leading this legislation. The Democrats have 2 black members in their conference. Republicans have 1 black member, but that always seems to come up that Republicans have 1, and Tim's been called a token. He's been called all kinds of things, and I just push back on my friend and to say, hey, I think we need to be able to just identify that. No, I understand, not by you, but I'm just saying I've heard it enough of late that it gets frustrating to me on that.
Well, and Tim has spoken out time and again when he felt it was necessary to speak out on issues of race, and if he thought that the Republican Party had a blind spot there. Hey, Senator, let me ask you, while we're talking about Tim, while we're talking about policing, you also made a comment about Confederate generals having bases named after them. You know, I grew up in the Deep South and was talking last week about the fact I just had a blind spot about the Confederate flag. I had a blind spot growing up about Confederate generals. You know, Robert E. Lee was thought to be, you know, this great Southern gentleman. And, of course, that we all talked about how they studied Robert E. Lee at West Point, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the South. That's the Deep South I grew up in Mississippi, Alabama, Northwest Florida, and Georgia. But you've come out and you've said that Confederate bases shouldn't be named after Confederate generals. Do you support what the military's talking about doing and removing those names?
Yeah, I think we should do a study to be able to look at the names all over the country, to evaluate the history of that name, and if they're a good role model. I'm not one to try to wipe away all history of every place, every monument, every location. We have good parts of our history. We have great parts of our history. We have very dark and ugly parts of our history. I don't think we can just wipe that away and ignore that all those things occurred. And I think it is important to have good reminders around our nation of dark seasons in our past so that we will remember what we've come from. But I treat that differently in things like schools and military bases. When you name a school, that's a role model for those kids that are growing up of who the school is named after. The same with a military base. You want those soldiers, sailors, and Marines to learn and to study and to grow in their skills, and also learn about this great leader from the past, this great military leader. And if that person was a Confederate general or was not a successful general in many ways or a leader, then that sets an example for them. And so I want people to be able to think seriously about the role model that we're setting in front of people.
All right, Senator James Lankford, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning.